Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum to all. I am Dr. Waqas Ahmed from the Center for Islamic Sciences, a research and publication center based in Canada and the United States. CIS was established in 2000 to enhance our understanding of Islam and Islamic civilization. This podcast and the subsequent ones, inshallah, are aimed at introducing one of the most important projects of CIS, which is the Integrated Encyclopedia of the Qur'an, IEQ, the first encyclopedia of the Qur'an exclusively based on Islamic sources and written by Muslim scholars. This 7-volume reference work presents all concepts, persons, places, events, and things mentioned in the Qur'an in a total of 523 individual articles, which comprehensively cover all aspects of each topic. All articles are based on classical works of Tafsīr, Hadith commentaries, Lugha, books of fiqh and aqidah, and other related areas. The views presented are not of the authors. Rather, IEQ integrates 1,400 years of scholarship into a cohesive narrative that is fully referenced with extensive bibliography. These features make IEQ an extraordinary resource that opens paths to a deeper understanding of the message of the Qur'an through authentic sources. IEQ was conceived as a scholarly text meeting the needs of 3 distinct types of readers: Muslims, academic scholars, and non-Muslims. Our guest today is Dr. Muzaffar Iqbal, who is the president of Center for Islamic Sciences, Canada, and the general editor of IEQ. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Muzaffar.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dr. Muzaffar, I've had the privilege of being part of this blessed project from its very inception. IEQ started in 2007 as a global endeavor with scholars and contributors from different parts of the Muslim world. At that time, the only existing English language encyclopedia on the Qur'an was by Brill Publishing, called EQ, and it was primarily written and edited by a team of non-Muslim scholars. So the 2 very important questions that arise are, why did you feel the need to produce an encyclopedia written exclusively by Muslim scholars using only Islamic sources? And why can't Muslims just read an English translation of either the Qur'an itself or one of the few Tafsīrs translations currently available to learn about the important themes of the Qur'an? And finally, what are the problems with Brill Publishing's EQ? In other words, why IEQ now?
MashaAllah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi bil alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala rasulika al-kareem. MashaAllah, these are loaded questions, and I hope to answer each section of your long question thoroughly and systematically. And the question that arises today for everyone, every 4th human being living on this earth who pronounces the true shahadas, Ashhadu la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. 1/4 of humanity today believes that the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down on the last messenger is the source of guidance, first of the 2 sources of guidance that we have. But at the same time, out of these 1/4 humanity, 95% cannot open the book and start reading Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alif Lam Mim Zalikal Kitabu La Rayba Fi. This situation has never existed in Muslim history until the recent times. The severance from the language of the Qur'an has a long historical process. Nevertheless, we are now living in a world where the message of the Qur'an is not directly accessible to even Muslims. Now, you asked if the existing translations of the Quran itself or a few translations of the classical Tafsīrs, why are they not sufficient? Translations are really a problematic means of understanding the message of the Quran, because what we are reading is the mind of the translator. Suddenly, the whole text has been reduced to the human plane, and the mind of the translator, who is going to deal with the original Arabic, becomes our medium. That is really, really a problematic situation for every single believer. Instead of listening to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reading the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are reading the words of a human being in a given language, whether it's Urdu, Persian, Bhasha, English, whichever language. And all of those languages are problematic because they are not the chosen vehicle of the final kalam, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the concept become distorted. For example, we read in the original text about a group of people called Ansar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose a group of people called Ansar, and in the translation we read helpers. The person who comes to help us in the kitchen is a helper. We have associations with helper, right? We cannot dissociate the language from. When we are reading the original text, we read something that is out of the human plane, that that came into the human plane from somewhere else, and it comes with a language that was existing. And this is a fascinating aspect of the Quran itself. Arabic existed before the Quran was revealed, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did, he emptied the content of the words of Arabic that was the Jahiliya Arabic, and he reformed, reshaped, and put new content. A classical example is that of Kareem, Allah Kareem. Human beings are Kareem, but Kareem in the Arabic language before the revelation of the Qur'an was somebody who is generous, and that generosity was understood to be somebody who gets drunk, and in that state he says, oh, I give you 1,000 sheep, and I give you this orchard, I give you this. That concept, even the concept of Allah was there in the Jahiliyyah, but their concept was Allah is one of the several gods. He's supreme, but he's one. Kareem, again, and many other concepts. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emptied the Arabic language, and he sanctified this language. So when we are reading translation, we are reading the mind of it. Now, as far as the classical Tafsīrs are concerned, they provide a deeper understanding, of course. But when we read Ibn Kathir Tafsir in translation, it's a very poor translation to start with. Again, we have the problem of translations. But even then, even if somebody was to completely understand what Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, Allah mercy on him and on all our scholars, was saying, is the view, understanding of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by one human being. What we wanted to do was to present an integrated view of the entire tradition. And then there are other aspects. There is the other aspect of your question. I will come back to this, inshallah. The existing encyclopedia of the Quran, which anyone who has opened that book would know how deeply poisoned that text is. Because that encyclopedia is the product of and continuation of a tradition of writing about the Quran and Islam and the Prophet ﷺ that started way back in the Latin Christendom. And then it transformed, and it went through Orientalism, it went through academic reworking of the same. But if you look at the text of that work, I have written a long review of that work. It is fundamentally flawed, And the problem is compounded now because this is 21st century. People know that you cannot just write what you wrote in the 20th century or 19th century. So they have sprinkled their poison and they have coated it with chocolate. I give you one example. Their article on the revelation of the Quran says that according to the consensus of the Islamic tradition, the first revelation came to the Prophet ﷺ. They don't say ﷺ, but it came to the Prophet in the form of a text written on a piece of paper, of cloth. This, according to the consensus of the Islamic tradition, this is written in black and white. This is their scholarship. Every child knows in the Muslim world, every Muslim knows that the Quran is an oral transmission through the Jibreel alayhi salam upon the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Iqra is not read this cloth that I brought to you, right? This is just one out of countless other examples. Look at their article on the wives of the Prophet alayhi salam. I don't even want to say what they have written. Nobody can say. So it is deeply problematic for many reasons. Plus, academically, it is a very poor piece of text, like academically, because if you look at the bibliography, it just revolves around a few handful of sources that they have access to.
Right. So the fundamental obstacle that most Muslims now face in connecting with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their severance from the language of the Quran. And so they're left with the only option is to read a translation. And you just explained the issues when you read just a single translation, the problems that face. And certainly the existing encyclopedia is extremely problematic. One of the main reasons being people who wrote this really didn't believe that this text is a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and treated it as a historical text.
Exactly. That came into our existence, and they don't deal with the question of how did it come to us. Some of them deal with the how did it come. They have outrageous theories that, you know, the Quran was compiled 150 years after the Prophet ﷺ, and even things like that. This is called scholarship. But I want to go back to the question of severance of Muslims, because that is my really prime focus and the kinetic energy that drives this whole project. There are two aspects. The severance part, the linguistic inability, is obviously the most important major aspect. If we cannot even read the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we cannot open any page and start reading, obviously that's severance, that is connection. But there is another aspect, and that is, for example, Arabs, people who speak Arabic as their first language, they can read the text. And there are lots of Muslims in the subcontinent, for example, who can also read the text. But there is a second aspect, and that aspect is the secularization of the Muslim mind. Now, this is a widespread phenomenon. Our encounter with the modern world, our education system, our training, the places we work at, everything has been secularized, which means the worldview that we carry in any of the concepts, primarily fundamental concepts of the Quran, that has been secularized through our education system. This is in the minds. This is in the thought process. When we think of beauty, for example, we inshallah talk about this wonderful entry one day. When we think of beauty, most people would think of beauty as advertised, as a, you know, beautifiers. The Qur'anic concept of beauty is totally different. It's totally different because we have a worldview that we receive through a whole life of learning through education system, jobs, etc. That secularization has produced many barriers. And one of the examples of that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's text is not sequential logically when we define logic in Aristotelian terms. For example, the very famous ayah about the completion of this deen, right? If you read the text, if you are reading the translation or even the original, what is before that? What is before that? It is dealing with the legality of certain kinds of meat. We are not dealing with the question of deen at that time. Many examples. Suddenly there is a shift. So there is a deeper continuation, there is a deeper thread in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that logically rationalized minds. Quran is a supra-rational text. Supra-rational. And by that I mean our thinking habits have been sort of flattened. You know, the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's book, when we read it, it addresses the entirety of our being, our intellect, our heart, our emotions, our feelings. There is a flow in it that is supra-rational, and that is a continuous reminder to everyone who is reading this encounter with the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kalam Allah, this is not an easy thing. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. يعني, and this logical word in which we have been constrained, our minds have become basically sort of flattened, right? So even when we read the text, there are barriers within our own beings, and some people, non-Muslims, are not respectful, then they would say, well, this is disconnected text. It needs editing. La hawla wa la quwwata. Can you understand? A human being has it needs editing. But for Muslims too, there is reading the Quran is a deeply spiritual phenomena. And in order to have really deep connections with it, not only to understand, but also to be guided. So why the existing translations, why existing Tafsīrs, or even the direct approach without the training to read it? I hope it's clear.
Right. I think that the audience now has a much clearer idea of why IEQ was necessary and how it solves so many of these problems that you have pointed out in translations and even translations of the existing Tafsīrs. Now, let's move to the format and structure of IEQ. There are a total of 523 articles. Can you walk us through how these articles were chosen and how they were grouped in different volumes?
The idea was to present the message of the Qur'an to the readers. Message of the Qur'an, Imam al-Ghazali, mashallah, Allah have mercy on him, you know, these scholars were geniuses. Their minds were so bright. He said that the entirety of the Qur'an can be conceived as the invitation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to humanity. And he says it is the invitation to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is Jawharul Qur'an, his short, beautiful book. And he says, in order to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need a path. So there is a risala. And then, because when you reach back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is going to be eternal life of one or the other kind. There are only two places one can go after that. So there is Ma'ad. So Tawheed, Risala, and Ma'ad are the fundamental themes of the Quran, he said. Now, when we thought of this encyclopedia, we wanted to convey the essence of the message of the Quran. And when you think of the essence of the message of the Quran, it is in one of the 5 categories. Number 1, there are concepts like dunya, akhirah, insan, maut, hayat. And these are concepts. Then there are places, there are things like zarra, body. There are people mentioned in the Quran by name. So concepts, places, events mentioned in the Quran. So there are 5 categories. When we looked at the list of, there are many existing sources to look at the list, like Tawheed, for instance, has many other related, for example, creation is linked to the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the themes are connected. So we divided every single article in this encyclopedia into these 5. They fall into one of these 5 categories. And in fact, we had more than 600 a list of 600 articles, which we thought would cover everything. Then we sent that initial list to scholars from around the world. And this list, as you remember, circulated for almost 18 months, year and a half. And many suggestions came, well, why don't you combine these 32 animals, entries on cow and the crow and all the animals, 32 animals mentioned in the Qur'an, into one article called Animals in the Qur'an, which was a wonderful idea. So instead of 32 articles, we have one article, which is in the first volume. It's a wonderful source for anyone who wants to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said about animals in general. So this list in itself was really a work of deep thinking and integration. Finally, we reached the current list of 523 articles, which comprehensively present the message of the Qur'an through individual articles. This was an organic process, and it's still going on. Sometimes, it may even shift a little bit, but it's a stable list now.
Now that we understand how these 523 articles, covering all concepts, places, persons, events, and things mentioned in the Qur'an were compiled, the question arises, who is the intended readership of this marvelous project? A common question that I get asked a lot, and I'm sure you do too as well, is IEQ just for scholars or Quranic researchers, or is it for ordinary Muslims as well? And finally, what value does IEQ bring to the non-Muslim readers?
Again, it's a very loaded question. Let's break it down into smaller units. Primarily, as we said at the beginning, the kinetic force, the real impulse behind this whole project is to bring the message of the Qur'an through the lens of 1400 years of scholarship to the contemporary readers who really believe that this is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the guide. This is my alpha and omega. This is the joy of my heart. This is the cure of my heart. This is the light of my life, everything. People who really believe that this is their source of guidance, but they have no access to know. Like, you're a doctor, there are probably millions of Muslim doctors. What do doctors do? They deal with the human body. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about the human body? We are human beings, we are insan. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about insan? What is the human condition? What is the purpose behind our creation? Everyone deals with this situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about three kinds of nafs. He mentions three kinds of nafs in our being. What does that mean? I have relationships with you, with this tree outside, with my wife, with my children. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about human relationships? These are fundamental questions that everyone sort of deals with, but vaguely. We want to make it very clear who is insan, this creation, one of the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is accountable, like the jinn are accountable. We wanted to present the jinn, for example, or the angels. What do we tell our children about dreams? Everyone dreams. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about the dreams in his book? What is the concept of woman? Like, these are contemporary topics, jihad, for example, all of these topics. So our prime goal is to present the message of the Quran in these very specific kind of top articles, to dealing with specific topics to Muslims themselves, and not through the lens of one single individual who is writing the article. And this is the beautiful part of this project. It's not going to be my views or your views or somebody's views who is writing the text. We are integrating 1400 years of scholarship, and we are presenting it in a form with full references. That's why it takes so long to write an article. Every single major statement in every single article has to be referenced back to the oldest sources. And when it comes to the older sources, once you reach the companions, Their insights are so deep. It's been
Mm.
1400 years. And when things go back to them, you get just an enormous insight into the message of the Quran. Number two, you must have received this question. Dr. Wakas, I have a colleague, he wants to know about Islam. Which translation of the Quran can I give to him? Like, this is a real need we have in this world where we are living among non-Muslims, and the world has become a village, and this, distances have reduced. What sources are there for us? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us shuhada ala nas, he said. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was in the last and the only Hajj, in the khutbah he gave, what did he say? Convey to those who are not here. This is our duty. What are we doing? If we were to give them a translation, no matter which translation, they would get nothing out of it. As you know, the translations are, number one, poor, plus the text of the Quran itself makes it impossible for anyone to know just by reading a translation. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about beauty? Where would you find it in the Quran? You go to the index and you find 50 verses where beauty is mentioned. Nobody's going to do that. Instead, if you have an article, if you have an encyclopedia which tells the angels, this is the sum total of our understanding from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about angels, about dreams, about war, about peace, about women, about children. Like, if you have one article, 20 pages, 10 pages, all aspects of that topic are covered. So non-Muslims who are seriously interested in Islam and the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So number two. Number three, and this is again very important. We are living in a world filled with misinformation about Islam in general, like in the Western world especially. How does that happen? This journalist who is just writing poison about Islam or the Prophet ﷺ, the person who wants to burn the Qur'an, all those things, like, these people were someday, were children. They were born one day upon fitrah. They were what did they do? What happened to them? They went through an education system. They went through the university system, and they received views about Islam, about the Quran itself, about the Prophet ﷺ, about everything related to Islam through what? Through a very systematic body of literature that has come into existence in Western languages, all Western languages, over the last 300 years. So who is presenting the message of the Quran to these young people in the university system who have no hatred of Islam? Who is doing that? Those who do not believe in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are the ambassadors of our book. What happened to us? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us so many resources, so many. Can you imagine that? This ummah, the wealth we have, and we cannot even convey the message of the Quran with enormous resources that Allah has given us. That is really not acceptable in this age. In the 19th century, they said they have to be represented. They cannot represent themselves. This is not 19th century. We have a duty, individually and collectively, to present the message of the Quran and insert it in the system, in the academic system. And this is very important for this project. For me, because I've spent all my life in the academic world, I know there are people who are not in the academic world, so they perhaps not understand the importance, the fundamental importance of correcting the genetic makeup of the contemporary world. Like, we can go after rotten apples, right? When there is a tree and we say, okay, we'll spray, do whatever. But the tree is rotten. The tree of Western academic world, the views about Islam, they are so fundamental. And in order to correct that, you have to go to the root, and they would only accept scholarly texts. They wouldn't accept, like, we can say whatever we want to say, but unless we follow the norms of academic scholarship. Look at this is really, really very important. We have spent tremendous amount of energy and effort. Every single comma, every single semicolon, every single format, our references, everything has to meet the highest academic standards in order to surpass their scholarship. And they cannot say, oh, your English is so poor, your references are so poor, you don't know how to insert all of these things. No, we cannot be we cannot be knocked out on technical grounds. We have to do things with ihsan. And our tradition teaches us. Our tradition is beautiful.
Right.
Scholars have really, really taken care of preciseness of language is the hallmark of our tradition. So that's why these three leaderships, all three are important at different levels. For Muslims, for non-Muslims, and for the academic world.
Right. Dr. The IEQ is written in a very unique encyclopedic style, which is different than what people are used to reading, even, for example, in books and so forth. What is your advice to somebody who finds it a little bit difficult to read the unique encyclopedic style of each individual article?
This is a very, very important aspect of this project. And, when we go to the store and we buy orange juice in the concentrated form, and we come home and we add 3 cans of water to make it drinkable, we cannot drink the concentrate. Encyclopedias at one level are the concentrate, and then the secondary works come out of those. So for the ordinary readers who do not have direct expertise or practice of reading encyclopedic text, our hope is, for example, take the article on angels. I have personal experience of teachers, for example, professors in university system, taking that one entry on angels. Now, this is the concentrate. They make their lecture out of that concentrate. If we don't have the concentrate, we cannot have the dilution. From dilution to concentrate is a very difficult process.
Right.
But if we have the concentrate, we can make the dilutions at various levels. For instance, parents, a 5-year-old, 10-year-old has a dream. A child has a dream, runs to the mother, terrified or happy, whatever kind of dream. What do I do now? This child is in a real situation, right? We tell our children, angels are going to protect you if you make these du'as, if you behave like. What is the concept of angels? How are we going to teach our children that angels are real? They are creations of Allah. Now, this is an article that would provide that. Now, if Muslims cannot read, if somebody cannot read those, we are hoping that there would be an easier version.
Easier text version available, hopefully, once the original project is completed.
Right.
There are plans to present a simplified text for those Muslims who find it difficult to read this very rich, unique style of writing.
And the example of that is that, if we have paper currency, that paper currency is backed by gold reserves.
Right.
If we don't have gold reserves, paper currency loses its value. Now, if we have lots of common, like on the internet, people can find anything. The beauty of this project is that the easier version would be the paper currency from this gold, because there are serious issues related to Aqidah, for example. If we make statements on our own, they don't make any sense. We have to, our deen is fully open sourced, fully sourced deen. Anyone can go, anyone can investigate it. And therefore, it's a very serious matter. Ibn Sirin, may Allah have mercy on him, he said, beware, because beware from where you are learning your deen, because this is a matter of the hereafter. This is a very serious matter. So our hope is that in time, various delusions from the academic system to colleges, universities, schools even, and homes benefit from this, inshallah.
Dr. Muzaffar, thank you very much for this very comprehensive introduction to IEQ. I hope that this podcast will be helpful in providing a true sense of the importance of this blessed project, and it will, inshallah, become a means to bring Muslim families closer to the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and present the most accurate Quranic perspective to non-Muslims as well. We hope that all Muslims will support this project in any way they can, and I encourage everyone to visit the project website at www.online.iequran.com, as well as our YouTube channel. Inshallah, the future podcasts will present a summarized version of different individual entries, which you will find very helpful. Thank you for joining us, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.